Welcome to Season 2 of Malevolent Autopsy. I'm your host, Queen. I use she, her pronouns. And before we go any further than that, let me warn you. This show contains major spoilers for everything in Malevolent as of the date this episode is published. We're going to dissect the patron votes that drive the story week to week. So grab your scalpel and let's begin the autopsy.
Hi, I'm Vol Control. My pronouns are he, him. And tonight I am controlling Arthur's metatarsal. His miraculously unbroken metatarsal.
What the hell is that?
It is the bones in your foot that lead up to your toes.
Oh, got it.
Mm-hmm.
Vol, can you read our wonderful chapter summary?
This chapter opens with the reveal of the most rare and anticipated event in Malevolent. Arthur has had a week of quality sleep and hot meals. We are so back. Not only that, but it seems Arthur has found a friend in Lord Everard. We get reassurance that the inventory is intact and Arthur's kitted out. We then are introduced to our traveling companions, Roderick Vale, a knight in black armor, and a timid-looking man, a most trusted companion of Everard's, and a ghost of Arthur and John's past, Antoine de Foyle. He is most trusted by Everard, but will we decide to trust him?
Thank you for the wonderful chapter summary. I loved this chapter for so many reasons.
Yeah, this chapter was really good. I felt like the vibes completely different. We're so back. We went from pretty much a bedrock moment for Arthur in the last part to like he's all better. He's no longer hacking up a lung. He's got a cool cloak now.
Yes.
Gauntlets. I mean, for real.
I love that he took time to thank him specifically for greaves and gauntlets. I feel like that was the missing detail that every artist was so excited to get out of this chapter. To know for sure, man has gauntlets.
But he still doesn't have
Gambison.
He's Gambison-less, yeah.
I also was so excited about Yorick's presence in general, but extra excited that we got to hear the silly music come back.
Yes.
The whimsical tune as soon as he spoke. That was so good. And that just reminded me of the wonderful discussion we had with Rose last episode. If you missed it, that's just one episode back.
And it was interesting that Yorick is no longer clacking. At first I thought that maybe that was just like a sound design choice that Harlan made because some people had some like auditory processing issues with the clacking. But then I realized like, oh, I wonder if that's because he's no longer moving his jaw when he speaks so that he can still speak to Arthur and John without anyone else noticing that the skull is moving or whatever.
Yeah. I realized when he started talking, I was like, where's the clacking? Where's my boy's teeth? And you know what? I was really pleasantly surprised that it was actually addressed in the audio where he was like, I can go back to that if you want. It was a really good gimmick when he didn't have that many lines or when it was very sporadic. But if he's going to be talking more, that would hurt my jaw and my teeth. Clacking my teeth together twice is enough. I'm good.
Yeah.
That's bones. I'm fine.
That's bones.
I feel that.
Yeah.
So, other fun things about this chapter.
We got a nice John scenery description right out the gate.
Yeah.
We love a scenery description. I think a lot of people have been making jokes like about Lord of the Rings, and this description of like how far we have to travel, it did feel very like Fellowship of the Ring kind of vibes.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people memeing about Arthur about to start his Middle-earth quest.
Honestly, I think that one of my favorite details about the off-screen time is learning that Arthur and Everard really like enjoyed each other's company, and
yes,
Arthur got a chance to like have a friend and some intellectual stimulation, and
I loved that.
I
love the mental image that I got of like Arthur and Everard sitting around in nice royal looking chairs having drinks and talking about things that matter and interesting stuff. I'm so eager to see what fans come up with as far as what they think they talked about.
Yeah, and that's one of the things about Malevolent is there's so little off-screen time. And I love what the fans do to, like, take advantage of it when we have it.
We also had John making an adorable little joke all this time around God's rubbing off on you, which was really cute. Yeah. I loved that. And I also really liked Arthur's reflective answer. He didn't really even laugh about it. He just went, no, I just really want to fucking go home.
Right. I was kind of surprised that they were already, like, chuckling about Oscar's letter being blank. I mean, they made some reference to, like, reading the Invictus poem, right? And the fact that Arthur was able to chuckle about it, I was like, damn, guy moved on fast.
I wasn't shocked. I actually was shocked that it even came up at all. Like, I genuinely didn't expect to hear about Oscar's letter again ever because it's burned. Like, what else is there to say? So it was a pleasant surprise to hear about it at all. And then, of course, I love that note that you put here in our document. I'm going to let you read it, though, about Yorick.
Yeah, I kind of touched on this already, but I was just wondering whether or not other people could hear Yorick. But when Everard is talking to Arthur, Yorick does say something. I think he says, Master, because...
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, because Everard asked if he could, like, buy the fucking skull off of Arthur. And I mean, all it made me think of was those Victorian cabinets of curiosity, weird macabre things, skulls and, you know, animal bones. And yeah, I definitely see Everard being the type to have one of those curios.
Fucking Everard straight up thinks that Yorick is the skull of Arthur's dead brother and still asks if he can buy it.
Yeah.
Like, the amount of social distance that Everard has from what is appropriate.
Oh, Nikki says he specifically talked about wanting it because of its power. I do remember him saying that, but I was like, what? What does he know? Oh, Nikki says everyone can hear Yorick. Yeah, because I was just wondering if the lack of clacking was proof that Yorick was no longer moving his jaw to speak and therefore could only be heard by Arthur and John. Yorick says, when could I have told you that the talisman could heal him? And I assumed that meant that Yorick couldn't speak because they were around people, but I don't know.
Right. When could I have? Yeah, that was I loved that. Speaking of Yorick, can we just talk about a friend?
Baby.
Can we talk about how Yorick was, like, touched to be a friend? I don't know. I didn't care that much about Yorick. He was great. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I didn't care like I didn't care about Oscar. That's a joke. Of course, I cared about Oscar. But I was shocked that my heart did a little wobble to hear this little skull be, like, excited about being a friend to Arthur.
Yeah.
That killed me.
I mean, okay, hear me out. That's one way of reading it, but you could also read it as Yorick realizing, like, the leverage that he would have by Arthur considering him a friend. I don't know.
Why are you like this?
You know what? I just gotta watch my back. And, you know, Harlan is always subverting expectations. I gotta be ready. I'm on my toes.
I think it's more likely that Yorick will have the opportunity to betray and ultimately, like, severely injure or hold Arthur back in some way, and then will harken back to this moment and realize that he can't do it because he has a heart now, and there will be rainbows, and Noel will lift up the helmet of the hat that he's wearing because he's definitely that night dude.
Yeah. I knew you were going to say
everything will be fine.
I knew you were going to say that.
And yeah, the talisman can heal, by the way. So, like, is that really going to be the end of Horrig's sickness? Do we really think that worked all the way? Did we just pick up an illness and then drop it and it's not going to come back in any way? How do we feel about this?
Okay, hear me out. I think that the talisman is only going to become relevant again when we have to use it on one of our party members. That's my prediction. Put that on the bingo card.
That's a good one. That would be fun. Mizra says, yes, Arthur is totally fine and will have no more suffering / delusional. Yeah, Nikki says that I believe that the sick/Horig is wrapped up.
Oh, Rebecca says, so Arthur's got a talisman that can heal him, so John can project with no negative effects for Arthur. Interesting.
I wonder what kind of nerf that talisman has.
Right.
There's got to be a catch, right? Like, it can't just indefinitely heal and protect Arthur forever.
Right.
So what does it do in exchange, or does it have so many charges, or
right?
Like, because I have to say, when we got John talking about projecting himself last time, we were very adamantly told, like, this hurts Arthur significantly and severely, which means it's not something that we want to use a lot. It's got to be a pretty dire situation for them to even think about doing it. I don't expect that's actually going to happen still for a long time, but I also am wondering, like, if it's going to be as easy as, oh, we have an object that gives us hit points now, so we can do it, more frequently. I don't see that happening, but maybe.
That would be cool. I mean, it would be nice if that happened, but the nice things that we get in between all of Arthur's suffering are few and far between in Malevolent. I mean, I like, Arthur's strife and suffering. Don't get me wrong.
Everyone, of course, in the chat goes wild for projection. Ink says, I want John to project more. I want to see him with my own eyes. Graham came up with a cool idea, which is, I think if you heal someone too far from death, they become a zombie, looking at the prints.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
Mesra says, I bet the next time we use it, it's going to break, or we'll find repeated use has negative side effects. Rose says, I mean, we did die to get it. Maybe we can have nice things with little consequences. Delusional. Hydrus, I'm hoping it's a lost time situation. Example, first use is quick, second use takes like a week. I like that. That would be very cool.
Yeah, that's a cool idea.
KM mentioned that we know the hand only has a few charges, so the talisman must have something. Arthur was dead with the stabs, though.
But I that's why I think that we're going to have to, like, burn it in some way on a party member rather than on ourselves.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Maybe we need to combine it with Aaliyah, and something magical will happen, but it'll burn the talisman.
So, moving quickly through this so we can talk about the vote.
Yes.
Even though that's not an extremely rife subject, but I know there's a lot to cover as far as, like, backstory for the vote. Offer my most sincere thoughts when needed. So, Everard was saying that Aaliyah would, speak for him in a way.
I'm so interested to see how that is done.
I do hope that she has her own voice, but I'm not banking on it. I think when we were told she doesn't talk, it was for a reason.
Yeah.
At the same time, I totally believe Harlan can do it. He's done like a whole TikTok series, I think, on how he did Marie's voice. So I totally know he can do it. But if he doesn't, it also makes sense because we were told right from the start that she's weird and doesn't talk.
Yeah. And a lot of people in the chat are talking about how they would love to see nonverbal communication. I think that there's a possibility that there might be some inspiration for that from Dice Shame, the actual play podcast that Harlan is also a part of, DM'd by his lovely wife, Jo. Currently, there is an NPC with the party named Wim who is mute and deaf, and so she has to read lips. She can mouth words, but often she, uses gestures or, like, expressions and things like that. And while I don't think that Aaliyah is going to be particularly expressive, I think it would be really interesting if she used some kind of nonverbal communication.
Yeah, I think it would be awesome. And the last few points here are
just descriptions.
Can we just briefly mention Roderick gets 2 swords?
Yeah.
How come your mom lets you get 2 swords, dude?
Seriously. And they're strapped on his back. Like, this dude's badass.
And more credit to the fact that he's gonna secretly be revealed to be Noel and from another time.
Yes.
Antoine and the description of Antoine, and then being called his most trusted. I don't know, that's so ominous to me. The way Antoine was set up here is a little bit creepy.
It's very interesting. For whatever reason, like, I sort of had this image of Everard in my head as being a loner and not trusting anyone. But here are 2 of his, like, people that he does not hesitate to say are his most trusted companions. Dude
has more friends than Arthur.
Yeah.
which I mean, the bar is pretty low.
Right.
But I didn't expect Everard to have any buddies at all. Right, I thought he was kind of like a standoffish, distrustful asshole. But no, he has a posse.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because I definitely think that Everard's trust must be very hard won, and probably you could lose his trust pretty easily with any kind of sketchiness. So it's really interesting. And considering what we know from Malevolent about Antoine, a famous cult leader, it's really interesting that the super the cult buster, this is one of his most trusted friends.
Yeah, that was really cool. And this last one here, Everard doesn't know Arthur's true intentions, so could Antoine also be bluffing his way? It's a very cool theory angle I have not considered until I read that.
I don't know. I mean, Everard is apparently he trusts Arthur enough to send him on this quest with the Blackstone and with two of his other most trusted. Could possibly one of the other people he trusts be, pulling the wool over his eyes?
Yeah, if Arthur is successfully able to fool and lie to Everard and get this far with him and be this close to him, it's so possible that all these other people could be doing the exact same thing.
Could be.
Let's move on to the vote.
Yeah.
To weigh the pros and cons of this vote, we talk a lot in the official Invictus Discord on a dedicated channel called Poll Chat. Let's go talk to the other patrons on our live stage show to uncover the pros and cons for this week's chapter and have a discussion about the merits of voting. I'm going to update us with some live vote statistics here. The chapter 246 poll is trust him at 83% and do not trust him at 17% with 341 votes total. And if you want to get even more specific and granular,
we have the way to look at the actual numbers.
That is 283 votes for trust him, and do not trust him has 58 votes.
So it's really interesting how one-sided, more or less, heavily weighted this vote has been, because I noticed in the poll chat that a lot of people were saying that they, at least early on, were saying that they didn't want to trust him. And so it's interesting that it's so obviously weighted towards trusting him.
Yeah, I think everyone's first instinct before they learned about Antoine and tried to think about the problem less literally changed. I mentioned in poll chat myself that it's not really a vote about trusting Antoine. It's more of a vote about whether or not we're going to hold people to what they're capable of versus what they actually are.
Yes, and absolutely.
We know that Antoine is capable of certain things, but we don't know that that's what he's going to do.
Right.
It's a little more complex than that. And I think it's hard when you talk about the votes not to get really literal about it and try to interpret exactly what the text says, but also not to go too far out and get too symbolic or metaphorical.
Right, but I do think that, and a lot of people have mentioned this, that this is, not about trust or not, but about whether you think that people under different circumstances have the potential to have a different outcome, to be a different person. And Hydrus just said, "It's yellow all over again," headed my hands. And in poll chat, AK Trash Panda also said, "Holy fuck, this is Yellow 2.0. This is expectations versus actions. This is nature versus nurture." I think that is a really cool angle and element of this vote.
Yeah, when I was in poll chat, somebody said, "My point is we don't know anything about this guy. Why trust him?" And I said, well, because the poll is actually about more than trust. It's about identity. If the poll were only about whether to trust a stranger we know nothing about, I'd agree with you. But the point is Arthur recognizes this man and whether or not he trusts him despite the actions of a version of him that he's familiar with. So in this case, it's we don't know anything about this guy. We have to trust him. We're trusting the other two people on this quest with us. Why not trust the third? That's really the significant thing here. We didn't get a choice about whether to trust Aaliyah and Roderick. Yeah. So, the fact that we get that option about specifically Antoine means this is about personhood and change and identity, which is what Malevolent is all about.
And most importantly, We missed out on our opportunity to befriend the last Frenchman, Jerry, my boy. My boy, Gerard. He was taken from us too soon. Antoine can be the Jerry that we were robbed of.
All right. I consulted with our lore experts, Graham and Nikki, and I said, can you guys give me a very short, condensed version of what lore you think is necessary to know for this vote? And I'm going to read you guys what they said. Graham said, Antoine is a man driven by devotion in the Call of Cthulhu 1/Malevolent timeline. This leads him to incredible acts of cruelty and manipulation. But this is an Antoine who has not been sharpened by the years, and there's a fairly solid possibility that in this world he has had no reason to go down that dark path. Booth John frames this vote as a choice whether or not to condemn a man for sins he commits in another life, and that's how I'm choosing to view it. So I'm voting trust. I don't think what someone is capable of at their worst defines the entirety of who they are. Isn't that one of the core themes of Malevolent? And I loved that. It was a very good and concise way to wrap up basically what Graham took away from this vote and some of the important points to make. Antoine, we haven't heard about him in a long time, so there's no shame in not remembering that name or not knowing what's going on. Booth John was very helpful in refreshing our memory about who he was, but John in narrative also said some helpful stuff.
And I also went through and read the transcripts for the relevant episodes where he gets mentioned, and I wrote down everything that we learn about him in Part 8, The Caves, and I'd be happy to share that after you share what Nikki had to say.
Yes, so Nikki said, in Call of Cthulhu Game 1, we meet Antoine and learn that he is fiercely loyal to those he cares for. Back in the 1200s, he served Enti, one of the 3 soldiers. He became a Shub cultist because Enti's mind was corrupted. When Enti's ritual failed, Antoine dedicated his life to realizing his master's vision, extending that life well beyond its natural span. Whoever he cares for, whatever his goals, he will go to extreme lengths to protect and see through.
I'm loving all of the insight from our lore masters. What I wrote... In Part 8, The Caves, we learn that Antoine was at one time the lighthouse keeper or posing as such. His portraits by the widow describe him looking dignified, regal, like a scholar, and that his eyes are cold. Arthur surmises that Antoine must have seduced the widow for his own nefarious purposes to coerce her into joining the cult. In Sarah Amanda Cummings' letter to Anna Stanzik, she shares that she discovered Antoine is hundreds of years old and that he came to the lighthouse because of, quote, the promise to a dying master of his from far too long ago to summon Shub-Niggurath and bring about the end of the world, a task that could only be completed by finding those who were connected by blood to those who first started the ceremony 600 years prior. Obviously, as you and I know, she writes, it failed, end quote. The portal Antoine opened is what allowed the King in Yellow to slip into this plane of existence. Quote, the king has nothing to do with Antoine, Anna, nor his plans. He simply used the portal because it was there. An opportunist who chose to enter our world. End quote. And, fun fact, this is also the episode where fuck me, fuck your eyes comes from.
Happy Fuck Your Eyes Friday, everyone.
Yeah, happy Fuck Your Eyes Friday.
I love this, and I especially love the personality that we have gotten some insight into for Antoine from our lore masters. I know we'll be hearing about that a little bit more later.
Yeah.
But I love that we have some identifying characteristics for this character already, and that it's really going to talk about what nature versus nurture is, right? Like,
yeah.
Antoine is, like Nikki said, whoever he cares for, whatever his goals, he will go to extreme lengths to protect and see through. Hopefully that is a character trait that he has regardless, but we really don't know. Maybe something he experienced put that into him and he doesn't have that anymore and he's a little bit more slippery. Like, we just have to kind of wait and see. I love the endless possibilities that you get when you bring up an old character in a new situation.
Yeah.
So I'm very excited.
Yeah. I think it's going to be really interesting, and I think that reading what Graham and Nikki and some of the other lore masters have had to say in Poll Chat, I find that his, like, core characteristics, his core tenets of, like, devotion and loyalty, very interesting. And his capacity for love, you know, he's a very, like, nuanced character. So I think that we should trust him and just see see what happens.
Yeah, something that we have written down here from Issy from Poll Chat back when the poll first dropped. Long post about knowledge of Antoine and how they viewed the choice and everything, but the specific part of this post that I want to touch on is this section that says, but perhaps most importantly, is it worth it to look past what either man could do and let them instead find a possible kinship in each other's dedication to what they believe in? Do we really want to play it like it's inevitable that Arthur is going to betray them, so why bother believing in other humans? What would doing that mean for Arthur, and what would that treatment mean for Antoine? Basically, I view voting not to trust him as conceding either that it's inevitable that Antoine will turn out to be an awful cultist, or that it's inevitable that Arthur has to betray them, so there's no point getting closer than arm's length. I want to believe neither is true, that Antoine doesn't have to turn evil, and that Arthur can still find an alternative solution to his awful arrangement with Cain. That's what voting trust represents to me. And something that great piece of writing revealed for me was that I really hadn't been thinking what it would say about Arthur's character if he chose not to trust Antoine at this point. Like the very specific act of saying, I have to hurt these people later, so I'm not going to let them anywhere near me. I mean, it's a choice, and it's a choice that a lot of people in stories like this try to make, where they're like, I'm going to shut everybody out because I have to do something really hard, and it's just going to be easier for me if I'm closed off to them and I keep them at arm's length. But Arthur is not that kind of person.
No, and it's interesting because I think that we are taught through Malevolent a lot not to be so trusting. And so it's really interesting to be in a situation where it feels like, oh, maybe this should be really obvious and we shouldn't be so trusting and we shouldn't trust this person. But it's so much more nuanced than that. It's so much more complicated. Such a flat out choice, trust or don't trust. But there's so many implications, like you're saying, about what it says about Arthur and what he chooses to do.
I also think it is an interesting way to also view the way that players are interacting with this game, this story, because I had been burned a little bit in the past trying to, in other stories, not Malevolent, thinking that, it wasn't safe to get close to any of the characters because it was just too hard when they were inevitably killed off, and trying not to pick favorites, and it doesn't really work out that way. One of the themes in Malevolent, people make a lot of jokes, but it's true. It's horror. There is going to be a lot of death. There's going to be a lot of leaving people behind and having to move on without people like Oscar, who were scarred beyond repair and now are just not part of the story anymore. I think it can make people feel a little bit bitter or resentful or even hesitant to get close to any of the characters because now what's going to happen to this one? But you can't, that's life, right?
Yeah.
If I spent all the time in the world thinking about how, my family won't be here forever, and so maybe I should stop going to parties that have all my family there because it just makes me more emotionally attached to them, and it's going to hurt more when they're not here anymore. It's not really possible to live your life that way.
No.
You have to choose to invest in people and get close to people even though it's not forever, and I think Arthur, of all people, has learned that.
That's very true. Yeah, Arthur does not have a great track record about people who are close to him in the timeline of Malevolent and previous.
Somebody in Poll Chat brought up this very early on line from chapter 15, Bone Seed 8660. John said, before he's actually claimed his name as John, I have to hope that any creature can be redeemed. And he talks about that when they're talking about sparing the Wraith. As far as the vote goes, I'm trying to think of that 17% of people who are voting not to trust him. I totally get the skepticism, and I totally think that some interesting things could come out of not trusting Antoine. Mm-hmm. I think it would make for very interesting character interactions trying to avoid interacting with this one specific guy on this very isolated trip.
Yeah, but it makes me cringe thinking about Arthur being rude at this very moment when he's got so much goodwill with Everard, and Everard's like, hey, this is my best friend, and Arthur's like, yeah, fuck that guy. But I did find someone who was talking in the poll chat and voting not to trust. Merrick's Moon said, "We're talking about Arthur getting too close, not wanting to betray someone he views as a friend. We don't know how long this journey will take. Arthur can be nice and gain trust without giving it, and end goal in mind, not trusting is in the best interest of that."
You know, I can also see that. I think it just, like I said earlier, it kind of depends on how you interpret the vote, because right now at this stage, it's so interesting to say, black and white, do you want to trust this person? You've just literally just been introduced to them. Even if we didn't know this person, that's a huge commitment to make. So I can't imagine this is like well, you voted to trust him, so now you got to fall on his sword. You know, like I don't think this is going to be like make or break. I think this is just an overall tone to start the relationship off with.
That's what I was thinking too. I feel like we are choosing what intention we want to go with forward here. And hopefully, if Antoine turns out to betray us, we will have an opportunity to cross that bridge when we get there.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it's not a very divided vote. I think that most...
It's hard. Yeah, I think we're very overwhelmingly in agreement to trust him. Even before people started talking, it really was leaning toward trust him. I wasn't at least present for any particularly scary-looking imbalance. So yeah, I think we're going to be voting to trust him, and I'm excited to see where that takes us.
Very excited to see what happens next, and hopefully maybe hear some new voices next week.
Yes. Oh my God, I'm very excited.
Fingers crossed.
And I think that we have been eager to make friends in the past, and we're constantly making blorbos of everybody we see. But in this case specifically, I think we're supposed to blorbo a little bit. So maybe the blorboification is on our side this time. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it, Vol. I had lots of fun with you.
Thank you so much for having me, and I hope to join you in future episodes.
The horrors persist.
But so do we.
Malevolent is a story rich in connections and deeper ties to other sources like Lovecraftian mythos and other Invictus actual play games found on the YouTube channel. To get more insight about relevant lore for this vote, let's chat with some extra knowledgeable lore keepers. I'm here with Graham and Nikki, our lore keepers for this episode. Would you guys like to introduce yourselves?
Hello, I'm Graham. I use he, him pronouns. And tonight I will be controlling Arthur's gallbladder, if he still has it. I don't know if they removed those in the 30s or 20s or 10s, that era.
And I'm Nikki. I use any pronouns. I also like some of those neo pronouns, E. And I am today Arthur's wisdom teeth. I have none. He may have none.
Thank you guys for coming on and delivering some super necessary and exciting lore. I know Graham is probably bursting to talk about Antoine, because that is a notable character from the Call of Cthulhu games, I believe.
Yes. Honestly, if you hadn't let me on, I was gonna hijack the show. I was gonna take over.
I believe it.
I love Antoine to a degree that is maybe a little bit concerning. As I like to say, he's my controversial fave, and he is definitely a very notable character from specifically Call of Cthulhu Game 1. He doesn't make an appearance until Part 6, but he is the main antagonist. He is the villain. He plays a very important role. And he's also a kind of background character in Malevolent.
I do really like how Malevolent carries on from all of the Invictus history, so to speak, and ties back to all of the things that are happening in those games in a way that if you don't know any of that background, it's still giving you the key points that are relevant. But if you do know that background, it just makes everything so much richer and deeper, with a lot more to draw on in your assessment of the work and the story.
Yeah.
So us meeting Antoine in Malevolent, we never actually meet him. We see the aftermath of all of this, and then being able to tie that back and having that piece in the caves under the island with the story that kind of unfolds there of how he came to that island and set up occult activity down there before he moved on to Arkham and carried on his plans with the game one. It's not only pulling through that character and information that has already been established, it's also fleshing it out more. We're learning new things in his Malevolent reference.
I feel like Malevolent kind of serves to... I mean, Sarah even outright says it. It serves to fully wrap up Antoine's story from game one into a neat little bow. Obviously, he was alive for over 666 years. Mm-hmm. So there's still a lot that he probably did in that time that we don't know about.
The comprehensive history autobiography of Antoine would be unreadable in a human lifespan.
Yeah, it would be long.
Yeah, and I think it also speaks to like the intensity of his character, that like he found a way. He was just a normal human person, but he found a way to extend and to carry on and kept that dedication to this quest that started with Enti that whole time.
Made me realize we should probably summarize Antoine's backstory.
Yes.
I'm going to just read out my slow poll message because I think it's as concise of a summary as you can get with Antoine. He's got a long life. In the Call of Cthulhu Game 1 / original Malevolent timeline, Antoine is a man who lives a long and dark life. He starts all the way back in the 13th century as a servant to one of the infamous Three Soldiers, a man named Enti. On this Three Soldiers' quest for the Blackstone, Enti is corrupted by his thirst for knowledge and his desire for power, and unbeknownst to his companions Nish and Erwin, falls into worship of Shub-Niggurath. All of this culminates in the year 1255. Enti attempts to summon his god, but is interrupted by Erwin and Nish, who try to stop him. Killed in the fight, and Nish almost follows suit, but he manages to get a fatal blow on Enti. Antoine stumbles upon the scene and stabs Nish in the back. To Enti's side, and as his master lays dying, Antoine swears to him that he will finish what he started and bring Shub-Niggurath into the world. Antoine spends the rest of his very long life making good on this promise. He founds the cult of the Black Goat, and at some point establishes a base on the island in the center of Lake Crawford, beneath the lighthouse. It is heavily implied that he manipulates the widow into a romantic relationship in pursuit of his goals. He uses her and leaves her broken in his wake. By the year 1890, Antoine is working as the butler for one Beatrice Coldwell when her niece Anna Stanchik comes to stay with her over the summer. The two develop an almost father-daughter relationship. Beatrice, however, discovers Anna's diary detailing a specter pursuing her and believes Anna to have gone mad. She commits Anna to Arkham Asylum and leaves her there to rot. Antoine, however, has other plans. In 1899, Antoine adopts a young Eric Stanchik from Arkham Orphanage under the pseudonym Arthur Stanley. He makes Eric his second-in-command, raises him from a child into a monster. He loves him like a son. Together they concoct a plan to bring together the descendants of the Three Soldiers, whose presence is required for the completion of the ritual. During the execution of this plan, Eric dies. Through a wild goose chase and some clever manipulation, Antoine sends the minds of the three descendants to the Dreamlands to suffer. After all, he doesn't need their minds present, only their bodies. The ritual is well underway when the descendants awaken. Antoine believes it is too late for them to do anything. One of them, Jarrett, manages to goad Antoine into releasing him from the cage Antoine was keeping him in. The two get into a scuffle, Antoine slits Jarrett's throat. Shub's tendrils begin to emerge from the portal and lift Anna, Antoine's pick for the host. Then Henry flashes a coin and is taken as the host instead, and somehow Shub is killed. Antoine dies in that cavern beneath 58 Pelican Lane. For further context, the other two descendants mentioned are Henry McFarland and Frank Underhill.
That is an excellent summary, Graham. Thank you for putting that together. You mentioned in your summary how he had selected Anna as the host for Shub to inhabit in the ritual of pulling her through into the world. And I just wanted to make it clear that in his mind, this was the highest honor that he could bestow to someone. It wasn't that, he was just picking somebody to suffer or anything like that. He wanted it to be Anna because he felt this deep, close connection to her and her brother, who he adopted and raised as his own. And he wanted to honor that by making her a part of this in the way that he could.
He loved those kids so much in his own super fucked up way. He is very much in Call of Cthulhu Game 1. He is a man defined by love, kind of. He's defined by devotion to specifically Enti, because everything he's doing is to fulfill Enti's dream and to fulfill Enti's goal of bringing Shub into the world. And you probably noticed mid-summary, I just started calling her Shub because I couldn't be bothered to read out her full name.
Yeah, well, and I think a lot of people default to calling her Shub because Lovecraft does have some extremely racist and messed up history. And it's just more comfortable, I think, for people to shorten it that way because we are talking about like a fictional character and we're not trying to participate in any of that stuff. But there is also nothing wrong with saying the full name. Like if that's what you want to do, I don't think that says anything good or bad either way. Just an explanation for those listening. If you guys hear people shorten it or say it in full, they're talking about the same person. It's just a preference. When you first listened to the vote choice about trusting and not trusting, did you guys have any kind of specific gut reaction versus what you're actually voting for now?
I went on a whole journey. Even before I started listening to the chapter, I saw that I had been added and I saw that there was a new chapter and I click on the channel and I'm always kind of curious. And so when I'm late to a chapter release, I like to click on one of the spoilered messages just to get a taste for what I'm going in for because I find it fun to see how it ends up playing out. And I click on a message and it's just Antoine in all capital letters. And my heart starts literally pounding in my chest. I scramble to the Patreon website to start listening to the chapter. And I check back to Discord and Joe's responded to one of my messages saying, don't click any spoilers with a little winky face. And I respond to her saying, too late, Antoine's here? And so I'm listening to the chapter and the whole time you can go back and check if you're a patron. You can go back and check. All of my live logs are just talking about, guys, hurry up. I want to see Antoine. Stop talking so long. Where's Antoine? And I'm lightheaded because I'm so excited.
Yeah, and the funniest part is that Antoine doesn't come into the last 3 minutes of the episode.
I was losing
he doesn't even say
mind.
anything.
And then I get to the moment. He's here. I get to the vote question. Even before I've finished listening to the chapter, before I've even gotten to the vote question, people are adding me in the eel pit going, Graham, what are you voting for? So I finish the episode, I go to the eel pit, and I go, I don't know. Because at this point, I had no idea what I was voting for. I was so hyped up on seeing Antoine, and I was so conflicted. So I went to voice call in the patron, voice section, and I hop on call with, I think, Autumn and Merrick's, and I just start talking about Antoine for a solid 30 minutes until I talk myself into voting for trust. And it's been history ever since then. But I went on a whole emotional roller coaster.
As for me, my very first thought was we shouldn't really truly trust anybody in this group. Not necessarily because they are untrustworthy, but because we are. Right now, we're being tasked with helping to transport the Blackstone to a new safe location and keep it from falling into the wrong hands in the process. Because Alia can tell that Cain, Lilith, whoever else is after this thing and knows where it is. We can't really get comfortable with anybody. With that in mind, I don't want to treat Antoine any differently than the other two.
Yeah.
So who is John? What does John want to be? Who does John want to be? He, from the very beginning of Malevolent, has indicated very clearly and very strongly that he has hope for redemption and that anything can be given a second chance and come good on it. And to be able to live a life and make choices while in the aftermath of mistakes and bad decisions, not necessarily forever tied to and bound to them. So in addition to that frame of mind, this is also a different person. It's still Antoine, but this is not the Antoine that was in service to the entity that was corrupted by coming in contact with this Shub influence and therefore followed him down this path. When they started out, the three soldiers were solidly on the side of good and fighting the evil in the world and keeping humanity safe. Without any evidence to the contrary, I would assume that was the position that Antoine came into the group with, and that has not changed at this point in this timeline. With that in mind, I see absolutely no reason to treat him any differently than the other two, to trust him any less than them. So putting him on par with the others, I feel trust is the vote.
I went back and listened to the end of the chapter and how Everard introduces Antoine, and more specifically, what Booth John says. Non-patron viewers wouldn't know this, but for this chapter, Booth John frames this question as, do you condemn a man for the sins he's committed in a past life? Or not a past life, an alternate life. A life he hasn't lived yet. A possible outcome of who he could be. Do you choose to condemn him and assume that that is what he inherently must be? And to me, that goes against the whole spirit of Malevolent. Malevolent is about redemption and change, and that no one is inherently good or evil. You know, like, John's whole arc is about how just being some sort of an eldritch monstrosity doesn't make you incapable of change or goodness or kindness. With that line from Part 3, The Mansion, where he says, I have to hope that any creature can be redeemed, which I feel does very much relate to this vote, like Nikki has said. I feel like I have to vote trust because we don't know this Antoine. We know what Antoine as a person is capable of at his worst, but this is presumably not Antoine at his absolute worst. He hasn't had 666 years of being a crazy cult leader to turn him into a monster. He's still young. I mean, Everard and John describe him as young. There's no reason to assume that he must be evil or that he is inherently evil. Also, one of my concerns was, if we vote don't trust, is Arthur gonna make a scene? Because that would be really awkward, considering Everard just introduced Antoine as being like, this is the guy I trust wholeheartedly. It would be so fucking awkward if Arthur was like, no, he's a crazy cultist, and he sucks, and you should just believe me on this. I want to hope that Arthur is smarter than that, but I don't know if I have enough faith in him to bet on it.
Yeah, like, based on the way the end of that episode was going and how he was just, like, kind of quietly meeting these people and then kind of started glitching when he was introduced to Antoine, I am pretty sure that the outcome of Don't Trust would be Arthur adamantly opposing Antoine's involvement in this. Even if he tried to do it subtly, then it would definitely impact like how he interacts with these people and how they then would respond to him. But yeah, I don't see any reason for him to raise concerns about Antoine over the other two, which is ultimately what I think the don't trust vote would do.
I mean, like, presumably Antoine and Roderick and Aaliyah have all met each other before because they're all close with Everard. So Arthur is very much the odd one out, and I don't think we're in any position to be making assumptions or accusations.
Do you guys have any particular theories or ideas about the different path that Antoine could have taken if he's not who he became, that we're, the Antoine we're familiar with?
I honestly think he is probably, I would assume that in this world he is now probably dedicated to Enti's original mission, fighting back against the darkness. He is clever. Everard says this. He also says Antoine is wise beyond his years. Although one thing that really stood out to me, because I went back and I looked over what we hear about Antoine in Part 7 and Part 8, and one thing that stood out to me is in Part 8, John is looking at the widow's drawings of Antoine, and he points out that Antoine's eyes look cold. And when John sees Antoine here, he recognizes him by his eyes, which I think is very interesting, and perhaps a sign that even though this Antoine is on a better path, he might still be capable of some ruthlessness in pursuit of his goals, which I think will be very interesting to see explored if Arlen goes down that path. And honestly, even if Antoine betrays us, I won't be that upset because I know it'll be super cool. And honestly, I think it's infinitely more likely that we're going to betray Antoine and the rest of the group and suffer consequences of it than Antoine is going to betray us.
Yeah. I understand what you're saying about a potential flag there about recognizing his eyes, which previously were described as cold. But it is, I think, worth keeping in mind that the same face can make many expressions and have many levels of warmth and coldness. So I didn't connect that he was recognizing the coldness of Antoine, more that, he's still a fairly distinct person, that like the drawings made an impression on John, and he can still recognize him even if he's younger and may or may not be in a similar frame of mind. His intense loyalty, I expect, to still be there, wanting to follow through on NT, but also pointing out, like what Graham and I were talking about earlier, of how devoted he was to Anna and Eric, and how much of a father figure role he felt and took on with them, as much as he was able to in their various life circumstances. And so I could definitely see him maybe wanting to settle down and being a father, or finding some kind of nurturing role in addition to his dedication to whatever his ultimate purpose is.
If we get a conversation with Antoine about him saying he's always wanted to have kids, I will bawl my eyes out.
Well, and that also makes me question how much of his relationship with the widow was an act and how much of it was sincere, because he does truly care for people. So I have always felt it was very possible that he wasn't just using her. Obviously he was, but he was using Eric, and he was using Anna, and he was using everyone that he interacts with. But that doesn't mean that he didn't have sincere feelings or care for them. So I think it's definitely possible that he did legitimately love or care for her in some way that was beyond just using her for her house and its ability to hide a tunnel under the island too.
The thing is, just the state the widow is left in is like so
That's
horrific. True. And it's implied that she was locked in her room for a long time, which has always made me kind of think. My personal interpretation of their relationship, which obviously I don't have like conclusive evidence for this, it's just an interpretation, is that Antoine liked her, but didn't love her the way he loves Anna and Eric. Okay, maybe this is just because I'm Arrow Ace, but I feel like it's easier to be detached in a romantic relationship than it is when you've got kids, you know? But again, like I said, I'm Arrow Ace, so I'm not exactly.
You know, that's interesting. It's interesting because I do kind of agree with that. I do think that observationally, marriage, being in a romantic relationship and stuff, it's seen as more of a choice than the love that one has for their children. I think it's just two very different types of love, and they're born in very different ways. I want to just say briefly that when I was listening to you guys talk about this, it made me think about how complicated and difficult most of the relationships in Malevolent are, and how really a lot of the point is their complexity and the depth of the circumstance and the emotions that entangle you in your relationships. Because I've said on Autopsy before in prior episodes, the relationship between people is not always as black and white as it sounds to others. You really have to be in it and experience it to understand it, and no one will be able to fully get it but you. And that makes me think of relationships like Larson to his children, because we know, I mean, I don't know that anyone could convince me, at least in my opinion, that Larson didn't love his kids, even the one that he sacrificed. And that doesn't mean that he didn't use her. That doesn't mean that he wasn't a terrible person for doing that and that he wasn't abusive, but that love and abuse and even, using other people that you love for things that you think are greater causes, those aren't separate all the time. I think people want to believe that you can't love somebody that you use, but you can. It doesn't mean that the use is less terrible. It just means those two things are separate. And I think it's really interesting to see yet another character that has that relationship with a family member where, I'm sure Antoine adored his children, but that didn't make everything he did okay.
Yeah, and there's another character who Antoine had a complicated relationship with that I want to bring up, which is Sarah, or Amanda Cummings. And we don't actually get any on-screen interaction between the two of them, but in the post-game Q&A for Call of Cthulhu Game 1, Harlan says that the reason that Sarah is at the ritual in the first place is because Antoine was keeping her to be his replacement apprentice after Eric died. And so it's fascinating the implications that has on Eric and Antoine's relationship, because Eric was his previous apprentice and his son. Adopted, yes. And Sarah, his new apprentice, he keeps her in a cage. It's objectively awful. That's always the implications that has on what Antoine and Eric's relationship might have been like at the very start. It fascinates me because by the time we meet him, Eric clearly is very devoted to his cause. It's obvious that Antoine loves Eric, but it just fascinates me to think that,
But Eric was also a tool that was brainwashed into being that tool.
Yeah. I mean, also, Antoine is from the Middle Ages, so just in general, I doubt his parenting methods were super great. It has fascinating implications for the character of Sarah and / Amanda, because no wonder when she sees his face in a history book, she can't let it go because he traumatized her so heavily. It's never really explicitly gone into, like, the conditions Sarah is kept in Call of Cthulhu Game 1 are not good. They are not conditions you should keep a child in.
And it was like 3 to 4 weeks. All of the like preliminary character intros for Game 1, I was talking about certain things that happened, like this happened 1 week ago, this happened 3 weeks ago. And these were all things that were the setup that was manipulating Frank, Jarrett, and Henry into getting involved in this. And so
I believe the one that's furthest back is Henry's, which is 3 weeks ago.
Yes.
And Roland had to have some time to get everything, to, like, even find these people. So I'm imagining that Sarah probably was in captivity for about a month.
Mm-hmm. It's also getting into Antoine, like, the Antoine that Arthur is afraid of, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And who this Antoine that we're meeting now is not.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
Could be.
So at what point do you guys see this path potentially diverging? I mean, if this guy is so incredibly old, how would you ever know, like, at what stage he's in?
He was a normal human at the time that he was with the 3 soldiers. So he's just about the age he looks at this point.
Okay, so he's still just like a normal dude.
Yeah.
Since Everard describes him as young, and I'm pretty sure John does as well, I'm assuming this Antoine is in, like, his early middle 20s. So he's most likely actually that age.
Yeah, because at this point he is a page or servant or lady in waiting for a knight, right?
Got it.
Towards
a scribe,
Enty.
a squire.
So he, yeah, exactly. So he might even be like late teens.
Oh yeah,
it depends on, because we don't know exactly how long he was with them. Just that he served Enty for a number of years before Enty got corrupted, and so the corruption would have happened a few years prior to the point we're in this alternate timeline.
I'm not certain, because that assumes that this is after 1255 and that the 3 soldiers still died in 1255, because they could have died earlier. They could have died younger, is my thought.
We're talking like centuries ago, so I think we're still in like roughly
that time
probably
period.
Because Kane did say it was shortly after the time the 3 soldiers stopped their search for the Blackstone.
Yes.
Whether that's because they died
actually,
or they decided to help Everhard keep it safe, hard to say. But either way, I think that, yes, Antoine is probably late teens, early to mid-20s at the oldest because of his relationship to the 3 soldiers, and they were probably not much older than like 40s or 50s. I don't think they were elderly when they were doing all this. And the point at which he would have converted to being in a cult and potentially seeking ways to extend his life to carry out this quest that would have happened already in this timeline, and it hasn't happened. So that's not to say that some other thing may not prompt him down that path in the future, but it just seems like it would be more difficult for that to happen. It would have to be some other person that he is connected to, or some other avenue of following his current goals that gets him corrupted separately.
I feel like it's important to mention that I doubt it was like a switch flipped and all of a sudden Antoine was fully like no cares in the world doing terrible things, because when we see him actually when Enty dies in the Call of Cthulhu Game 1 timeline, we see that whole scene, and even in that moment in time where he's already joined the Shub cult and he's already like started down his dark path, he's still at the very start, and like he doesn't torture Niche or anything, he doesn't do any grand monologue, he's freaked out, he stabs Niche in the back, and then he freaks out, and he runs around, like, distraught, not knowing what happened, and, like, kneels down to hold the corpse of his dying master, and he's upset. He is not at this point an evil mastermind. He's not, like, really conniving or clever or anything. It's 666 years is a long time to build up a worldview, and it's a long time to dedicate yourself to a cult and to this inherently harmful quest, and it's gotta change a man. That's a long time for a man to become cruel and to develop such a twisted view of the world.
Is there anything else that you guys feel is important to mention, especially relevant to the chapter, the vote, or any predictions you guys want to make?
I just want to say, for as long as Antoine is in the party, I'm going to be in a state of perpetually losing my mind. I'm so excited. It's a little insane. I'm a little insane. I'm not normal about this. I will never be normal about this. I'm so happy.
Yeah, I am also very excited to see where this goes and what happens. I really loved getting to see Yorick talk about how he's grown and developed the ability to speak without moving his jaw anymore.
That was great.
And his little a friend was so sweet.
As for predictions, I'm really, really hoping that this whole quest with these 3 other people who are ostensibly actually focused on protecting the Blackstone from evil forces, I'm really hoping that this gives Arthur the opportunity to learn more about what it is and what its implications are, and therefore what the implications of actually following through on Kane's deal and request could mean, and start thinking about and maybe coming up with some ways to try to not do it. Like, what alternatives might there be?
I have a prediction, and I am 100% going with it until proven wrong. I've made a bet with Fish. Antoine will have a German accent. I need him to have a German accent. The one reason I could see it being different is because Harlan struggled so heavily with that accent in the Call of Cthulhu game that he just gave up and started using his regular voice for Antoine. So I'm hoping for a redemption where we get, like, a really good German accent. I need his birthmark to be mentioned. These are the 2 things I want, and I will be so happy. I want his birthmark to be mentioned, and I want him to be German. And that's all I need.
What birthmark does he have?
He's described as having a faded birthmark that goes across his forehead.
Ooh, okay. Interesting. I'm very excited. I think Harlan will do an incredible German accent. I think he's had a lot more time to practice. It's been several years now, and I think my prediction for specifically Antoine is that he will be a very divisive character. I think people are going to have fights about Antoine. I think he's going to turn out to be about as divisive as, like, Everard was, where people, like, didn't really have that much of an opinion, and then all of a sudden had a lot of big opinions that immediately got turned around. Like, I think it's going to be that kind of journey.
I'm hoping that he gets to live up to my nickname of me calling him my controversial fave. I hope he lives up to it.
I'm really excited to see what's up with this Roderick guy.
Yes, well. I am too. I'm excited to reveal that Roderick is secretly Noel or knows Noel or can get us to Noel in some way.
Oh, one tangent, if you don't mind.
Go for it, Nikki. All yours.
It's going to be really quick. So through the majority of Malevolent, Arthur is on his own. He and John against the world, and that's the way it is. In season 4, that starts to change slowly. He ends up going on a mission with one other person, Oscar. Then, in the order, he's going on a mission with two other people, Charlie and the Butcher. And now he's going on a mission with three other people. And it's just slowly increasing. So he's building up his team member group size skills.
So what I'm hearing is that in season 6, we're gonna have a party with 4 people, and one of them is gonna be Anna Stanchik.
Absolutely. All right, so in the Strange Beyond games on the Invictus stream, and some of the intros, that campaign takes place around the time that Malevolent was going. It was still Patreon only. It was a few chapters in, and Harlan was specifically mentioned that in addition to it being carrying on from his Call of Cthulhu campaigns, it was also pulling together a lot of the threads that the entire Invictus stream had been weaving in their meta-narrative. And so I am incredibly excited for whenever Brandy Jack shows up and whatever nonsense he gets up to.
As for predictions, things we want to see, I'm really hoping that we get to see some nonverbal methods of communication explored with Alia, and I'm hoping we get to see a little bit more of what she's like. And I'm personally hoping that she has about as many social skills as Everard does, which is to say, 0.
That would be funny.
I'm hoping they're just two weirdos who live in a castle together and host murder parties and think they're so normal.
Sounds great.
Thank you guys so much for coming on. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate your help getting a deeper understanding of what the fuck's going on.
I loved being here. Me and Bird on the Invictus server are working on putting together a lore-based podcast for Malevolent, helping to explain and make some of the back catalog and the backstory established in the Call of Cthulhu games more accessible for people, because right now it is a huge time sink. It's a lot. It's a big commitment, and a lot of people don't have that kind of time, or don't have that attention span, or they just don't like actual play. All very valid reasons. So me and Bird are putting together a little podcast to help make it more accessible, and we will be using the summaries by the amazing Liz, the arch nemesis of Malevolent Autopsy. And we're going to start off with Call of Cthulhu Game 1, and in addition to episodes summarizing the actual episodes of the game, we will be doing some character deep dives to talk about a particular character and dive into them. And we're hoping to start this off this year, but I know both of us have been super busy, and I personally have been having a lot of health issues. So, unfortunately, it hasn't quite gotten its feet off the ground yet.
That's okay. I believe in you. And I think putting an idea out into the world and seeing how people react to it is a great motivator to be able to do that. And I hope that life allows you to make some time for it to happen, because I'd love to support you in that journey, especially because I am exactly the person Grandma's talking about. I can't do actual plays. I can't do actual plays. And the Invictus back catalog is a lot for me to commit to. So I would love to have a more digestible format to get more into the nitty-gritty stuff behind Malevolent. Thank you so much. And I welcome you to come on and plug your podcast again when it's up and running.
Yeah, speaking of the back catalog, so the Call of Cthulhu run that are pre-Malevolent timeline. I'm not counting Grimm. Grimm is great. It carries on the Call of Cthulhu into history in a different timeline, but it's not Malevolent historical. So just the ones that are Malevolent historical, Call of Cthulhu specifically, is 23 3-hour episodes. So that is a lot of time.
Putting that into context, they've been recording stuff for like a decade, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
The very first Invictus stream was January 26th, 2015, which was the character creation pre-thing for the Dragon Age. So it doesn't exactly count, but they did live stream it. And the first official Invictus stream show that was an actual gameplay was Wednesday, January 28th, 2015. And they did every single Wednesday for a long time. So yes, this January 29th, since it is Wednesday is the key, January 29th of this year, 2025, will be the 10-year anniversary for Invictus Stream and all of the branching media that came from that. Dice Shame, Malevolent, Divisor, etc.
Yeah.
So that's a long time to be sticking with something. It's been great. And it's a good time catching up.
Yeah.
I love seeing you folks and interacting with you guys too. So thank you for having me.
Of course, of course. Well, thank you guys so much both for coming, and I appreciate it. I'm sure I will see you around the autopsy table.
Excellent. See you around the slab.
Thank you, of course, to Harlan Guthrie, the sole creator of Malevolent. You can find everything official at linktree/Harlan Guthrie. Without his labor of love for a story he wants to tell, we wouldn't be here. And speaking of here, if you want to be part of the live vote chat I record each week, join the Invictus Patreon and connect your Discord account. We have our own private patrons-only autopsy channel. If you want to chat with me and maybe even some other folks you hear from on the show, you can also find a public autopsy channel from the Invictus Discord so you can hang out even if you're not a patron. While Malevolent Autopsy is my pride and joy, it wouldn't be ever improving without some key players. Thank you to Mizra, Nikki, and Vol Control for their work editing and assisting with production. They do so much for the show, and they do it all as volunteers, and I couldn't be more grateful. To submit a voice recording, have your message read aloud on the show, or find us on other platforms, visit linktree/Malevolent Autopsy. Let's hear from one more Malevolent fan before we finish this week. I'm your host, Queen, and I'll see you next week. The horrors persist, but so do we. Thank you, of course, to Harlan Guthrie, the sole creator of Malevolent. You can find everything official at linktree/Harlan Guthrie. Without his labor of love for a story he wants to tell, we wouldn't be here. And speaking of here, if you want to be a part of the live vote chat I record each week, join the Invictus Patreon and connect your Discord account. We have our own private patrons-only autopsy channel. If you want to chat with me and maybe even some other folks you hear from on the show, you can also find a public autopsy channel in the Invictus Discord so you can hang out even if you're not a patron. While Malevolent Autopsy is my pride and joy, it wouldn't be ever improving without some key players. Thank you to Mizra, Nikki, and Vol Control for their work editing and assisting with production. They do so much for the show, and they do it all as volunteers, and I couldn't be more grateful. To submit a voice recording, have your message read aloud on the show, or find us on other platforms, visit linktree/Malevolent Autopsy. Now, let's hear from one more Malevolent fan before we finish this week. I'm your host, Queen, and I'll see you next week. The horrors persist, but so do we.